Venezuela is still one of the biggest outliers in history. Venezuela it has been able to manage so many hard things. And in that sense, this is not different. Secondary strikes are more plausible. But the thing is that you already lost the surprise factor. And after that, they will come back home. If they come back home, PTSD, depressed, their soul crushed and destroyed, probably suicidal, on opioids and fentanyl that doesn't come from Venezuela. I mean, it's going to destroy this. This is destroying the soul of the American people as well. I mean, this is something that you have to take into account. This is not that far as Iraq was back then. Blowback, it's going to be faster, swifter, and closer, and it's going to harm the U.S. society as a whole, one more time, which is the case. And of course, they say about we're going to subsidize, that's Trump's words, of the oil industry and so on. But that's not money that's going to come from corporations. So where's that money going to come from, of course? I'm not saying this, as in sexy terms. It actually sucks. We don't want to go through this. But if there's no other choice, that's going to be their reaction. And another thing is to occupy a country that's 3 times Vietnam. And it's as proud as feisty as Vietnamese. This always happens when things are improving. One of the reasons is because it has been proven here and Iran and somewhere else that the sanction regime after 1,000 sanctions haven't succeeded.
Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. I've got my Gallo Pinto hat, the Red Rooster. This is hand-delivered from President Maduro when I was in Miraflores Palace not too long ago. Joining me today, though, to discuss all of this, what's going on in Venezuela, is someone who's in Venezuela, someone that we've been discussing this matter with quite a bit over the past few months. Diego Sequera is one of the co-founders of Misión Verdad. He is a Venezuelan journalist, and he's one of the millions and millions and millions of Venezuelans that is outraged by what has taken place over this past week and what the U.S. and the empire has been doing for decades against those in Venezuela who have been trying to assert their own sovereignty. So, Diego, thank you so much for joining me today. Just to start off with, maybe what is the mood in Venezuela like right now?
Hey, Jackson. Thank you for having me. And that's a cool hat, by the way. There's a Gallo Pinto around also chanting right now where I'm at now. Well, the mood, basically, it's calm. I mean, I think they were also one more time expecting what hasn't happened the last 4 to 5 months, basically, which is some sort of unrest, social breakdown, upheaval of any kind, civil war, and nothing of that sort is happening. I mean, of course, I'm not saying with that everything's cool and everything's fine and everyone's happy, because that's not true. Sometimes it's tense calm, sometimes you can get a bit worked up, and the overall feeling also, it's either from the politicized camp in Venezuela, it's of course they're incensed, they're just offended, and I mean, yeah, offended by what has happened and also what this means not only to us but to the world in general. And then you've got people that basically maybe they're not in too much within the political fray, that they're just basically going one more time about their lives. Yesterday and today, people got more into their daily routines. Things are working. There's no scramble for at this point groceries or fuel, which are usually the first reactions, which did happen on the morning of January the 3rd, but things have just eased down a bit. There's supply of everything still, so that's basically it. And pretty expectant. And as you know, well, our interim president Delcy Rodriguez has been just sworn some minutes ago. So state and government are still functioning the way they should, contrary to what many people are expecting. I mean, I just gave a previous interview. They told me that now that the old regime is gone and the new one, first of all, it's government continuity, and it's based and framed under our constitution. And if you see the cabinet, it's just the same cabinet with of course, a major significant difference, but it is rallied behind the fact that we have an interim president until our legitimate elected president is back in Venezuela, along with the first lady.
Yeah, that's what I don't really understand here is you have all these US pundits saying, well, the oil is ours now. We are in and out in 30 minutes. We have the oil, we have this, we have that. The regime is gone, but everyone's still there with the exception, of course, of President Maduro and Celia Flores. So
Exactly.
it doesn't make sense to me really, and it doesn't I don't understand what the purpose of this is. Do you think that this is about trying to just weaken Venezuela as a whole, another blow to Venezuela with the goal of hopefully eroding it further to the point of absolute servitude in due time?
Absolutely. I mean, this is about realigning Venezuela, and I mean that's the wishful thinking, and I don't think that it doesn't. It's not in tune with the narrative that they have been saying so far. I mean, as we have Venezuela under control, and yeah, exactly, the oil is ours and so forth. I don't think that there is actually a plan after this moment. Maybe it is. I'm not sure, but it doesn't seem to be a clear one, especially because yeah, there isn't exactly a regime change. That's not happening in the the proper sense of the word, and they're not relying, at least at this point, and that's something Rubio has been stating clearly recently regarding. I mean, there's no replacement. There's no Maria Corina Machado or González Urrutia or anyone. It's now in power and changing everything. That's not happening right now. But they aren't managing the situation so far. Of course, this can be dangerous if you follow the threats that we've listened to. And of course, it looks like they have the expectation. They want, interim President Rodriguez to now toe the line. And it doesn't seem that way. If you see the footage, for example, the first three foreign delegates that were on the when she was sworn were the first one greeted were Russia, China, and Iran. So there's a clear message there also. Regardless of the content of, some people might be confused with the content of one of the earliest communication, which is basically the government of Venezuela position is we want shared development, we want to work with the United States, and so on. But this has been the case throughout. I mean, if it's going to be a rational actor, another player among others that are going to treat us as equals, there shouldn't be any problem. Of course, this is I take it as a formality that shows well the coherent, rational stand of Venezuela. But let's see what happens now. I mean, still there's a lot to see and see what else unfolds.
Well, when I saw that now acting President Delcy Rodriguez made that post, that statement, of course, maybe to the average viewer, you'd be shocked and like, oh, wow, she's really bending over for the U.S. now. But if you listen to the last speech, the last interview that Maduro gave, he was saying the same thing.
Exactly.
He was saying, I hope Chevron can have a 100-year lease to operate in this country. But it's the U.S. that's fighting against that, right? So yeah, it's not really a change.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the whole problem, which has been the constant throughout, a quarter century up to this point, is we can't do business. Venezuela can't do business, but under Venezuelan terms, and that doesn't mean you're not going to be in a win-win situation. The problem is greed and, of course, the unrestricted access. Now, this is on the vis-a-vis trade level, of course. This goes beyond, as we all know, and if we go into the geopolitical aspects of this, it's far more clear now. But that's it. I mean, that has been Venezuela's position regarding the United States ever since. I mean, until 2013, maybe 2014, U.S. was the main buyer of Venezuelan oil. And suddenly it didn't happen. They were the one that actually withdraw from commerce. There was many of these companies were basically sabotaged by their own government, by the ideological factions of government, especially during the first Trump term. I mean, that's where Valero lost, and that's where also Chevron have, many issues. And of course, this brings something that I think is quite important here, which is when they talk about, this is my own interpretation, of course, when they talk about oil companies coming over and reconstructing the infrastructure, as we actually needed that because it has been reconstructed anyway by Venezuelans. Uh, I always get the feeling that basically they're talking about Exxon. Exxon is one of the main funders of Rubio's PACs. And Exxon is the one that didn't accept any kind of agreement with Venezuela back in 2007 when the whole renationalization process started. And many companies stayed, they remained in Venezuela, they accepted the new terms. Others withdrew, but they were compensated. And others went to courts, just like Exxon. So it sounds to me that this is mostly an Exxon drive, especially if you pair this with what's going on in Guyana and our disputed territorial waters, where they're, the Starboard Block and so on, where they're extracting oil illegally. And just think for a moment, if you're an Exxon hotshot, to just imagine to control all that belt of crude, sweet crude in offshore, and Venezuela's Orinoco Belt heavy crude. That would be, that sounds incredibly sexy for Exxon executive, but also, of course, for Empire, in order to be able to have a far more powerful leverage regarding the energy markets and to impact other oil-relying economies, at least to some extent, like Iran and Russia, for example.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, the greed of ExxonMobil, I never lose sight of the fact. I always think it's amazing when you look back that Chevron and other companies agreed to negotiate with the Hugo Chavez administration. And Chevron was even given an additional 6 months to negotiate terms with the government in Venezuela, and they still rejected it. It's just immense levels of greed that has now led to this event right here. But my question to you is, right now, China, as I understand, is involved in the exporting of about 75% of the daily oil output in Venezuela. Maybe the numbers fluctuate a little bit.
Exactly.
That oil is being exported on the petro yuan rather than the petrodollar. Who is the United States to come in and say that the oil is ours now, when I'm sure China probably has long-standing contracts with the Venezuelan government? How does the U.S. believe that that's just going to work? They're just going to take the existing oil operations of China.
Yeah, well, they're already saying it. I mean, Trump said that we're going to sell the oil to them and so on, as being them the middle. Well, you could understand the middlemen here, but of course the intermediaries. But of course, that's not what they say. I mean, they're already saying it's their oil. They have been doing this very dumbass historical interpretation of the relationship and the property of oil and the assets that extract them throughout the whole oil industry, which is basically a massive historical hoax, of course, with that kind of geniuses like Stephen Miller behind them. So if you get into that, if we're able to actually get into that mindset, of course, they're saying that it'll keep coming. It was a way to cool off. Maybe this is me speculating to a point that will ease up the Chinese concerns regarding the oil supplies and the oil output. But who can actually believe Donald Trump at this point, or the U.S. government in general? I always remember. Sadly, my Russian is not as sharp to say that word, but they have this compound word that says that U.S. are basically like the Europeans, also non-agreement capable, and the world knows this. So how actually is this any reassuring for the Chinese or any other player that is involved in Venezuela's activities?
Yeah, and either way, it's I guess it's a lose-lose. The U.S. pisses off China either way, because either they're gonna hike the prices of Venezuelan oil, which I don't think they're gonna do. I think they'll probably keep it for themselves, or China's gonna go and just get more oil from Russia, form closer ties with Russia. I don't know. My My doubts here of this plan are endless, if there really is a plan, as you mentioned. Uh, you know, Rubio and Trump have highlighted the fact that they are not afraid to have U.S. troops on the ground. And I guess that
Yeah,
makes sense because I don't think they've ever fought in a war. I'd understand why they're not afraid of that. And they don't have kids that are going to fight. So,
yeah,
uh,
exactly.
what can you say about the sentiments of rank and file Venezuelan military, people's militia? And also, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about, there's been a lot of talk. I don't know if it's hype. There's been a lot of talk about like ELN and former FARC related groups in the jungles near Colombia and stuff. What is the deal with all that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't had any up to this point. I've been traveling throughout the country. I haven't reached Caracas yet, by the way. But on the sentiment of rank and file militia people and soldiers, I mean, there are some footage going around. I'll send it to you. For example, for example, people that were young soldiers that defended the Rivas battalion in Fuerte Tiuna that actually were able to repel an attack. So the whole story actually is still not complete and hasn't been told. We have to wait for this. We have to wait when our side, the Venezuelan side, the government side of the story comes out and gives us and shed even more light of what actually happened and to what extent, and also to challenge the narrative. Of course, at this point, the government have to be more focused on precisely ensuring all the legal steps to keep stability, the stability that already, in fact, is happening. And regarding I don't know about what you say about the guerrillas. I haven't had any direct take about this, and the problem is that there's so much hype going on, so much informational intoxication, obfuscation, and misinformation that I actually don't know up to this point what's up with that. Especially that these are narratives that has been adapting and changing also at least for 15, 20 years. And they also heavily rely on Uribismo in that sense, and the malicious Colombian establishment that currently is not ruling the country, by the way. So that's another one that we have to give a few time to see exactly what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about the sentiment on the ground? I mean, I think this goes without saying, but I think it'd be really important for the audience to hear this because there's videos from 2022 FIFA World Cup celebrations going viral, and people are saying that's Venezuelan celebrate. Chile, Madrid, wherever, Doral, Florida, AI videos. What is the real? And you said you're traveling right now, so maybe you're not in Caracas. What can you say about what you've seen?
Exactly. I mean, and I've been in small cities in rural Venezuela, and actually I've also done some interviews to common farmers, campesinas and campesinos. I mean, and actually the overwhelming majority are actually just, like I said, they're incensed, and they're willing to do whatever needs to be done to defend the country. That's something that I think is very important. Regarding the people celebrating, there are some, I think, not significant, but there are some people, especially not in Caracas, because I think the people who were actually expectant about a military operation that's going to sort everything out in Caracas, they probably just got scared or ashamed after what happened on the early morning of January the 3rd. And the main footage that you can see of people celebrating when it's not out of context, it's actually diaspora Venezuelans, middle to high class diaspora Venezuelans, the people who actually have access and time and the money to be on social media and to support narratives and spinning, even, well, I don't know, even with guidelines, it's far more easy to do that outside of Venezuela. And but there is no such celebration inside Venezuela. There's no such thing as, some people rallying and thanking the United States for their quote unquote favors or anything. That's not happening. I haven't seen it personally. I do see people, I mean, the first days, I mean, many businesses were closed, but usually, which is a very common thing in townships and in Venezuela, people, yeah, in the afternoon they all sit in front of their houses, in front of their porches, and talk and have coffee and play domino or whatever. Especially these days, because these are still, up to this day it's holidays. It's day today. It's January the 6th, Reyes here in all the Catholic celebrations, and which is quite important. But there's no, like I said, the conversation, you can find any kind of take. And if it's not, like I said, if you're not politically motivated, you're worried about what could happen. And I don't think they're thankful about, I mean, it's hard to find someone that says, oh, now things are going to improve so much. I mean, we've gone through enough, we have seen enough to know that this is not the case, and there's no automatic guarantees of something like that, especially if you take precedence here, as what happened. People are conscious about what has happened in other places in the world, from Iraq up to this point. So you have to be really in denial and within that cognitive bubble in order to still believe that this is going to improve anything just by itself.
Mm-hmm. I when I was there for the presidential elections, obviously there were those big protests that were going on, and it's very clear those were funded by USAID, NED. Obviously there is opposition, right? But the violent stuff, I mean, that stuff is all fake. I met an opposition person at the airport once when I was on my most recent trip, and they were super chill. They're like, yeah, we don't like Maduro, but we don't like Maria Corina. We don't like those crazy Zion. We don't like that either. So I wouldn't be surprised if people, the vast majority, I haven't seen one video of people being happy in Venezuela, right? It's kind of like with Iran. There's a lot of Iranians that, maybe they drink a little bit here and there secretly. They're like, I don't know about the whole, Shia government. But when Israel started a bomb, they said, oh, no. We're not gonna support this. This is our country. This is our government. Exactly. We'll be the ones to fix it if we see problems. So that's basically what we're seeing there. Even I've seen some videos saying opposition are even joining these protests against the US and Trump and what they did.
Well, because that's quite important, and it's quite similar to what has happened in Iran. And I also saw it firsthand. I talked to people that we share the same issues, the same problems regarding the economy, for example, which it's frustrating, and the lack of horizon for common people that they don't necessarily have to be so aware of the big picture, like, geopolitical geeks like ourselves. They're just common people who have common problems, common concerns, and common goals in their lives, and that's the vast majority. I mean, and yes, like you said, like the story you're telling, that's absolutely true. There's a lot of people that there are on the opposition, but that doesn't mean they want their country destroyed or ruled by these crazy people. This is an important angle, because there has also been public statements of opposition, moderate legal opposition. When I say legal, I mean they say they recognize the government, they acknowledge the legal system, and there's some Venezuelan airplane now guarding the sky.
Very good. Salute to them.
Yeah, exactly. And some people don't address enough the fact that these people are even more under pressure, under blackmail, under threats by the extremist factions of the Maria Corina Machado types against them. This is something that people are not that aware, and it's not as publicly. I mean, they should be this segment of the opposition, which I think it's highly important to be active, should be more vocal about this kind of things, because it's not something that we don't know. Many of these people actually were, denounced as collaborationists, and some of them even got sanctions. Are sanctioned. I mean, some of these opposition leaders are actually sanctioned by the United States. In order to what? Clearly to inhibit the moderate factions that are actually for coexistence, for the legal and democratic process. And yes, of course, this is politics. They want to reach power, but they want to do it the legal way, the proper way. And they also realized back then, I'm talking about 2017, 18, 19, they were too close to the abyss. They were too close to lose their political capital. And they realized this is not the way. Same with the economic circles, the private sector of Venezuela, who also they also lost too much regarding sanctions and so on. Just like Chevron, by the way, and Valero and other U.S. companies.
Yeah, I don't see how any sensible person could support what they are threatening now. And this will be my final question to you. Thank you so much for your time. Rubio and Trump have obviously toyed around with the idea several times, saying secondary strikes, second wave of attacks. Delcy Rodriguez, Diosdado Cabello, Pedrino Lopez, the People's Militia. It doesn't seem like any of them are, at least rhetorically, playing ball. It doesn't seem like they are, I guess legally playing ball either with the U.S. dictates and demands. So, they've also talked about U.S. troops on the ground in Venezuela. I mean, what do you think would happen in a situation like that? They try to Gazify Venezuela. They tried to occupy Venezuela. I can't imagine that it would be a good result for any of those, young Americans, mostly poor Americans, who are going to get sent off to go and occupy Venezuela.
Yeah, and after that, they will come back home. If they come back home, PTSD, depressed, their soul crushed and destroyed, probably suicidal, on opioids and fentanyl that doesn't come from Venezuela. I mean, it's going to destroy this. This is destroying the soul of the American people as well. I mean, this is something that you have to take into account. This is not that far as Iraq was back then. Blowback, it's going to be faster, swifter, and closer, and it's going to harm the U.S. society as a whole, one more time, which is the case. And of course, they say about we're going to subsidize, that's Trump's words, the oil industry and so on, but that's not money that's going to come from corporations. So where's that money going to come from, of course? The problem is, yes, I do believe it. I don't think it's rhetoric. I think that defiance is there. And so it's concerning because that makes the secondary strikes more plausible. But the thing is that you already lost the surprise factor. You already lost it. It's not the same anymore. This is not a blitzkrieg possibility now, not at all. So it's complicated how that could work out. And yes, the problem is, Jackson, that this is the world after Gaza. So this kind of wars have the silence and complicity or the lukewarm approach of many governments and multilateral bodies. It has the AI-powered target banking, geolocation, SIGINT resources. It has all that privatized approach, and it has also the more nihilistic, I don't know the exact word for this. I mean, but the hate for life, for the sacredness of life itself, because we are now all, regarding to the parlance when they were killing the fishermen or smugglers or whatever they were in our shores, and the Colombians and the Trinidadians, they were there was a legal name for that. It was unprivileged belligerent. So now we're all unprivileged belligerents in that sense, and this is quite concerning. But Venezuela is still one of the biggest outliers in history. Venezuela has been able to manage since its foundations as a republic, manage so many hard things. And in that sense, this is not different. Of course, it's different because of the obvious reasons, of the massive armada and the overwhelming force and so on. But one thing is to do this kind of incursions, this kind of filibustering, in the classic, antebellum filibustering, William Walker style. And another thing is to occupy a country that's 3 times Vietnam, and it's as proud, as feisty as Vietnamese. So, and I'm not saying this, as in sexy terms. It actually sucks. We don't want to go through this, but if there's no other choice, that's going to be their reaction. But people, of course, people don't want this. People just want to live their lives. And now, and even something else. We've been close. This always happens when things are improving among ourselves within society and with the economy. I think one of the reasons is because it has been proven here and Iran and somewhere else that the sanction regime after 1,000 sanctions haven't succeeded. Venezuela has diversified, has recovered its economy, and we're still holding. So they had to do something else and nothing else worked. And the main resource they were relying on, which is Venezuelan society proper, hasn't worked either. So that's why they had to do what they did with Nicolás Maduro and Cilia Flores, our president and the first lady.
Diego Sequera, thank you so much for joining me here today. We'll have, again, all of your social media websites linked below in the description for everyone to follow along. You provide the clearest of all, I guess, reports as we could ever hope for in the face of this.
Thanks, man.
Just true evil. It's true evil. And you say, yeah, we don't want a war. It's not sexy. I agree. Especially if I was a Venezuelan in your shoes living in I would not want a war. But the truth of the matter is that when true evil steals just the pure God-given grace of a people, something has to be done about it. And that's what Venezuela is going to have to do. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Dios con nosotros.